now per student than we have been. And does that reflect itself in the rating that the school gets? And maybe not, because what you're saying that we're not rated that highly. The other, and I wanted to bring that number on the student load. The other part of it is, and it may be shameful to say, but the worst enemy for the schools are the unions, the school unions. I'm a former union member when I was working in a college in a place, and I understand, and I worked for a company that had union employees. But if you do some reading on unions and schools, the unions, unfortunately, all too often don't reflect what they need to get a better result from the schools. It's more for growth of the unions and more money.
The unions are against performance measure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that is the real problem. That is the key problem.
Nick, your daughter went to school in New York, I think, college?
College, no, she went to Harvard.
Okay.
One went to Harvard, and the other one went to University of California.
Well, then I'm going to mention something about the New York teachers that are on probation.
Right.
Remember? I think it was 60 Minutes.
Yeah.
They have a very large group of teachers who were incompetent at teaching and identified by the school authority, and they are currently being paid, there's hundreds of them, being paid to congregate in a room playing cards while their hearing comes up,
Right.
and the hearings don't come up for several years. And I feel sorry for the taxpayers of New York because they're paying those salaries.
Correct.
As you know, both of you were involved in programs with the Framingham Taxpayers Association for the past 2 years. One, if you recall, was that disastrous increase in our property taxes. And also very, very recently, you were talking about the governor's proposed taxes, which I understand passed the Senate. Now the question I want to ask is basically, what do you really perceive to be the main problems that the town faces, and how are these problems related to the state and national problems?
What do you say?
Okay, thank you. Our chief financial officer prepares a 5-year, long-term financial
Right.
program. The viewers go right online, you can find it. I would encourage you to read the oldest one, which might be 2011 to 2016. Please read those, because you will see some statements made in those reports where the CFO says if we cannot change this number, the town cannot sustain itself. The language has softened over the last few years. I'm not sure if it's because the numbers have improved, but the amount of money spent is always categorized and confined in 1 year. I find it so, I work for a company that had 3-year plan, 5-year plan, 10-year. These are business plans.
Right.
These are, 50,000 employee. They have these plans. You modify your plans, you adjust them as time goes along. We have a plan, and yet, as we go to town meeting right now, you will see that they will be in a sigh of great relief when all the budgets get passed. It's only for this year, but the same thing happened last year and the year before. They're not looking ahead. I remember a number of years ago where the unfunded liabilities for Framingham, as declared in the Metro West News on July 1st, 2012, was $371.5 million. Unfunded liabilities, you gotta pay it at some time. And the budget actually had a number in it that reduced, and the number was over $10 million. Ultimately, it was taken out of the budget because when they did the calculation, the deficit was so great that they couldn't face presenting it to anybody, so they removed it. The newspaper article on this July 1st also states that the town would need to put in over $25 million a year to make that right, to minimize and reduce that unfunded liability. And I don't see that, and I'm hoping that town meeting members at some point, when they ask questions, and not just vote yes for everything, ask the questions. How much is in there for the elimination of unfunded or reduction of unfunded liability? Even the stabilization fund for a number of years which is supposed to be 5% of the total budget, was not 5% of the total budget for a number of years, because they couldn't find the money to put into it. Now, that's a rule. The town has to have 5%. I think last year they may have achieved it finally. It was a number of years where it was below that 5%.
Correct. Yeah, I would like to add something else which I think is very important. The numbers that are mentioned by Enzo are underestimates. And underestimates. And the reason for that is because most of the time, we're making the assumption that the funds in the system are getting a return of 8.25%. And of course, that is totally unrealistic. In other words, who is getting 8.25% for the last, 6 years? Therefore, what happens is that those unfunded liability values are really much higher than the ones given by Enzo. And I think people do not understand that. And I mean, this is the way the state treats it. The state says that, the return on the investments, it's 8.25%. I mean, that is totally unrealistic.
Nick, the treasurer of Massachusetts, I think his name is Mr. Grossman, said for the last 5 years our return on those investments is 1.1%.
That is correct.
They're calculating 8% to do their numbers of how much does the town owe, and in reality the return is a little bit over 1%. It may be better now. At least the market is producing a higher amount, but nowhere is it near 8%.
And not only that, but I mean the market is doing better because the Federal Reserve System, is sustaining the market.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean ultimately the Federal Reserve System is not going to be sustaining the market. Therefore, I think what we will observe over the long term is that the market will have a big drop. And when that happens again, then the unfunded liability values are going to skyrocket.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask a question to both of you. As an ex-reporter, I would like to ask this question. Do you feel the media, especially the business media, are reporting on this accurately and to the extent it requires? Or is there a bias against and favoring what the current administration is doing?
Well, the media in general does not understand economics. I hate to say that. So let us talk, for example, rates of return, as he mentioned, of 1%, 1.25%. Well, the inflation rates are actually higher than that. Therefore, in real terms, what has been happening is that the value of those investments in real terms have been going down.
Right.
And the media doesn't report the importance of these interest rates that we face right now that are below the inflation rates. Now, for the elderly in particular, having these artificially low interest rates is really a threat to the economic situation of the elderly people. Because after all, the elderly people depends upon some investments. Well, so now we're getting, 1% return. We're getting 1% return and the inflation rate is 2%. Therefore, in essence, we're losing value on our assets. And this is a very serious problem. And regrettably, I don't see it addressed anywhere in the media. I mean, people just ignore it.
Wall Street Journal is ignoring it?
Even the
Business
Wall Street
Week?
Journal, absolutely.
Business Week too?
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to seg into it briefly what the Framingham Taxpayers Association addressed about 2 or 3 weeks ago, which was the governor's proposal, which has raised a lot of controversy, and as you know, they voted strictly according to party lines. What's the significance of that and the impact on the state? And is it being repeated throughout the country?
The one-party system is very dangerous. We have a one-party system in this state. The leadership leads the party. What they say goes. The House of Representatives in our state just voted, I think it was yesterday, on a portion of the budget, and the vote was identical down the party line.
Right.
And unless things change, there isn't much that's gonna change. The governor is not threatened by we people, we taxpayers. He's not afraid of us. The governor, as a matter of fact, the Framingham Taxpayers Association put on a symposium on the 13th of April at the Costin Library, and there were 4 people invited to attend. Chip Faulkner, who is the Associate Director for the Citizens for Limited Taxation, Paul Craney from Mass Fiscal Alliance, another fiscal responsibility type organization, our local representative Chris Walsh who covers part of Framingham, and the MTC was the representative of the governor of Massachusetts.
Did you try and contact them?
On March 18th, I faxed a letter to the governor's office.
What'd he say?
I invited him to what the meeting was about, to come or send a representative spokesperson to the meeting. 10 days later, I got an email back saying the governor's busy. And I responded to the email saying the other half of the invitation was for the spokesperson for the governor to attend. There was 1 fax, 3 emails, 4 telephone calls over 3 weeks with no response, no positive response. They said they're going to try. The state representative, Chris Walsh, says, let me give it a try. He called, he got rejected also. The governor doesn't think enough of us, where we're holding a symposium on his proposed tax hike, to even send a representative. In my simple thinking, I'm saying, the governor's in charge of tens of thousands of employees in the state, and he can't find 1 employee to send down on that Saturday morning to the Costin Library. It truly disgusted me.
Let me ask a question.
May I follow up on what he said? too?
Absolutely.
You know, not only do we have a one-party state, but I think this is having a very serious impact on elections throughout. Because you see, take a look at the voter turnout
Yeah.
for the elections.
I was about to ask that.
I mean, it is absolutely a disgrace. I mean, you know, these are the type of numbers that you would observe, you know, in the old Soviet Union. I mean, you know, who takes seriously the elections? And I honestly think that we have reached the point in Massachusetts where, you know, people don't take seriously the elections because there is a one-party control in the state.
Nick, you are the vice chair of the town, of Framingham's Town Republican Party.
Right.
What's your take on this? What are you advocating?
Well, number one, there has to be better communication with the voters. And number two, there has to be better representation in the media. And I think Extra, for example, is doing a very good job of trying to present alternative points of view. But of course, all the media should present, you know, views from the right, from the left, and mainly views from the independent voters.
Correct.
And, you know, right now in Massachusetts, we have that the vast majority of voters are independents. And yet, that is not part of the media coverage. Therefore, I mean, this is what we need to do. We need to bring back competition in the state. And if we do not bring back competition in the state, I mean, the democratic process is going to fall apart.
May I comment on that, please?
Go right ahead.
I'm not a Republican and I'm not a Democrat. I'm an independent, unenrolled. I represent 52 to 55% of the voting population in Massachusetts. And I am amazed at the amount of people who don't go and vote. As an example, our most recent election, which didn't have very many things to vote for, 9% of the enrolled voters, registered voters, voted. On average, about 13% to 15% of registered voters in Framingham go to the polls on a non-presidential election period.